So I just want you to know, as I did last week, this is actually the third sermon that I wrote for today. The first two sermons, of course, had to do with the state of Israel and what's going on there. Because initially it struck me so deeply about how Joseph was thrown into this pit and his father had no idea what happened with him. And that struck me as such an incredible parallel for the hostages that have been taken, and how many parents have no idea what's happened to their children, or soldiers who are on the front lines whose parents have no idea what's going on with them because they're out of contact. But I put those sermons aside. And as always, if you want, you can get them. I'll give them to you. But as we enter this season of giving here in America, we're so desperate sometimes as parents to teach our children lessons about how it's better to give than it is to receive. We live in a society, in a world in which the constant barrage of items that we can purchase is ever present. You can't get away from it. Whether you're on social media or not, it is incredible how quickly what you think you want pops up in an ad. Sometimes I feel as though Alexa is listening to me and putting that on a variety of feeds, including my New York Times subscription. But then I found this fascinating article by Michelle Borbo, who is a child psychologist, and she explains, here are 5 signs that you have raised a spoiled child. They don't take no for an answer. They're more into receiving than giving. They demand things ASAP, immediately in some cases. They think only about themselves and they're never satisfied with what they have. I love that Michelle Borbo wrote a list so that she could tell you if you had a spoiled child, as if you couldn't tell on your own. It's like you need a professional to tell you. Now, I'm no professional. I have raised 5 children of my own, but I'm no professional, but I can spot a spoiled child a mile away. And maybe the reason why parents can't see spoiled children is because of the proximity. They're just too close. Maybe parents can't see what they themselves have created. The issue for us today is not whether or not our children are spoiled or not. The issue for us today is what kind of adults are they going to become if they are spoiled children. We know there is a fine line between making sure that our children's needs are met and going overboard. Making sure that their physical and emotional needs are met is the job of a parent. But before I launch into what are the results of overindulgence, I'd like to talk a little bit about what happens in this morning's Parashat, because I think, except for one circumstance near the end of his interaction with his brothers, Joseph is actually a spoiled child. 5 out of the 6 statements that we have that come out of Joseph's mouth, 5 of the 6 times we hear him speak, they are self-absorbed comments in which he truly degrades both his brothers and his father. He escalates a circumstance with another person towards the end of this morning's Torah reading that didn't need to be escalated. She was already on edge. And then at the very end, the very last words we hear from Joseph are just downright cruel. It's a pattern that begins maybe as a naive child who is spoiled into someone who becomes an actual cruel leader in the land of Egypt. And it's only towards the very end of the story do we see that Joseph learns what it means to be a true leader and not to be a spoiled adult. So we meet Joseph for the first time through his father's eyes. Vayisrael ahav et Yosef mikol banav ki ben zkunim hu ve'asa lo kitonet pasim. The very first interaction we see is where Joseph gets the coat of many colors. It's a story that was made famous by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and for some of us, blazoned into our minds is Donny Osmond wearing something other than a Technicolor Dreamcoat. I'm pretty sure that's why my first marriage fell apart. I'm just kidding. Israel, Jacob, not only holds a special place in his heart for Joseph, but he literally wraps him in it. The coat of many colors becomes an object of such derision that it eventually is torn from him, soaked in blood, and then essentially thrown back in his father's face. But I've jumped ahead. But the coat ennobles Joseph. You know what it would feel like. You can imagine in your mind, if any time you were to come into conflict, how you could adorn a coat of armor yourself and feel the strength and the power of it. And that's what happens to Joseph. He is ennobled. He gets the clear message that he is better than his brothers, and he's not in any way grateful. He's entitled. Nowhere in the text does it say that Joseph might have said, like Opie Taylor, "Oh, gee, Dad, thanks." Rather, Joseph's response was, "Vayachalom Yosef chalom v'yaged le'achav Yosifu od sno oto." He dreamed a dream of how much better he was than his brothers, and then he had the audacity to tell them. And guess what that does? It instills in his brothers a sense of hatred. He lords over them. Vayachalom od chalom acher vayisaper oto le'achav. Vayomer hinei chalamti chalom od v'hinei hashemesh v'hayareach ve'achad asar kochavim mishtachavim li. He dreams another dream, but this time it's even bigger. This time it's the sun and the moon and the stars all bowing down to him. Vayisaper laviv v'lechav. And then he told his brother and his fathers how great he's going to be. How it's destiny that he will become a powerful individual. And then you skip 2 chapters ahead. And he's being chased, as Leo pointed out, by Potiphar's wife. And his response to her is biting, as if to say, "You're not good enough for me." You think, because you've heard the story so many times, that the reason why Joseph rebuffs Potiphar's wife is because he's afraid of an entanglement with this woman that might end up in tragedy. Vayima'en vayomer el eshet adonav hein adoni lo yada iti ma babayit v'chol asher yesh lo natan biadi. But he refused, says the text. He said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master gives no thought to anything in his house. All that he owns is placed in my hands. You're not good enough for me," he says. "I'm in charge now." It's not that he's afraid of the consequences of actions, of his interactions with this woman. In his eyes, she is beneath him. He is deserving, and again, I use the word, he's entitled to so much more in his own mind and in his own heart. And then there's one more interaction, one last moment before his transformation. And in fact, it's the last piece of the entire portion, the very last sentence of this morning's reading. It's as if the story leaves us to think about, to review, to put together the pattern we see of Joseph before his transformation. And it's in this moment, I believe, we see Joseph acting in his most cruel way. Be'od shloshet yamim yisa paro et roshecha me'alecha v'tala otcha al ha'etz ve'achal ha'of asher bisharcha me'alecha. You remember the story, right? The story of the cupbearer and the baker. And they both come to him with dreams. And Joseph interprets the dream of the cupbearer for the good, the baker for the bad. And he says to the baker, if I'm interpreting your dream properly, and guess what? I never get it wrong, you're going to die. And it's going to be a cruel death. Can you imagine having that knowledge and then sharing it? How cruel that is. As if he's completely blind to how the words that he says lands on other people. He's only interested in that moment and in every moment before that in showing how great he is, how skillful he is, how much he can tell the future. He's only concerned with himself, not with the impact of his words. Look, I recognize there are a variety of commentaries that see that is the moment of transformation. That Joseph, when he starts to think about other people, that's the moment where he transforms from a slave in a dungeon to the right-hand man of Pharaoh. I dare say that it's no transformation at all. He's still as cruel as he was when he was a child, a spoiled brat that he was. When we leave Joseph in this morning's portion, he still is incarcerated. And I believe that is the point of the entire narrative of Joseph. When we're only thinking about ourselves, when we only think about our own selfish needs, then we in fact are prisoners. We in fact are enslaved to our needs and our wants and how we can fulfill our next desire. The story of Joseph's release that we will continue in next week's portion doesn't even solve the problem. The character flaw in Joseph is he's spoiled and he becomes cruel. Next week, when we read of Joseph's rise to power, we'll see how he uses information to enslave the people of Egypt. And in so doing, he consolidates Pharaoh's power. Another act of callous indifference to causing pain and suffering. And it's not until his radical reawakening does he rethink his entire approach to life. It takes, you'll see in next week's portion, an entire breakdown on Joseph's part to change who he is. Because guess what? It is so hard to change who we are. But we all must begin the process of realignment, of recovery, of reconnection. Whether it's with people we have wronged or all new people entirely. Joseph for us is a cautionary tale. Joseph reminds us it doesn't have to be that way. We must do what Michelle Borbo suggests to combat potential difficulties of living a life in which we're constantly searching for ways to please ourselves. She reminds us that if we do 4 things, we can live a life of meaning and purpose, because simple acquisition provides neither. Praise the right things. Call out insensitive actions. Boost gratitude. Focus on giving, not getting. A life lived wanting is a life that leaves us unsatisfied. A life of giving gives us meaning and purpose. Shabbat Shalom. Continue with Musaf, page 184. Chatzi Kaddish, please rise. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah v'yalemad